I never expected my life to split cleanly in two before I left for Europe and after I came back. Back then, everything made sense. I had a home, a fiancé I loved, a family I thought supported me, and a future that felt solid. Looking back now, I realized the fracture had already begun. I just didn't see it. I lived in a restored brownstone on a quiet street in Cambridge, Massachusetts, ivy-covered, with creaky floors that told stories of decades past. The kind of place that smelled like old books and fresh coffee, where I could hear the rain tap against the windows in the mornings. That house had character, and I loved every inch of it, from the little reading nook by the stairs to the faded blue door that stuck in the winter. My fiancé, James Carter, had helped me renovate the upstairs office into a small home clinic. He said he admired my work. I was a nurse practitioner running a free clinic on weekends for underserved families. I believed him when he said he loved that about me. He was from Albany, New York, came from money, old money, the kind that doesn't show off but owns everything quietly. I never really cared about his bank account. I liked how he smiled with his eyes and how he always brought me black tea with lemon when I was studying late. We'd been engaged for 6 months when I got the invitation to join a medical volunteer program in Scotland. It wasn't glamorous, no big organizations or media coverage. Just a small team helping low-income communities in the outskirts of Edinburgh. A friend of mine had gone the year before and said it changed her life. I wanted that. I needed to get out of my bubble and do something that reminded me why I became a nurse in the first place. James was hesitant at first. 6 months is a long time, he said, running a hand through his dark hair. Already picturing dinners without me, I imagine. But he came around, told me he was proud of me. He even drove me to the airport that rainy April morning, kissed my forehead, and promised to take care of things back home. I didn't know then what he really meant by things. Before I left, I packed up most of my valuables just to be safe. Jewelry, some important documents, even a few family heirlooms I didn't trust to stay behind. But one thing I left hanging in my closet, my engagement dress. It wasn't a traditional white gown, not yet. It was a soft champagne silk I'd picked up in Manhattan during a spontaneous trip. It cost me $2,600, the most I'd ever spent on clothing, and I planned to have it altered into my wedding dress. I left it in its garment bag, zipped up neatly, untouched. Lila had been there when I bought it. She said it was a little plain, but I knew she was just jealous. Lila, my younger sister, had always been the center of attention, even when she wasn't trying to be. She was born with the kind of beauty that opened doors. Long legs, flawless skin, the kind of smile people remembered. She never worked a traditional job. After college, she became an influencer, which meant she took photos in designer clothes and got paid for promoting face creams she never used. Our parents adored her, or rather, they adored what she represented. Success, charm, beauty. Me? I was the practical one. The one who patched up scraped knees and filled out insurance forms. When I told my parents I was leaving for Scotland, they looked at me like I was abandoning something. Not someone's something. You're walking away from your future, my mother had said, swirling her wine glass as if she were delivering a line from a soap opera. My father barely looked up from his crossword. I tried to explain it wasn't permanent, that James supported me, that this work mattered. They didn't get it. Or maybe they just didn't want to. So I left. Scotland was beautiful in a quiet, rugged way. The wind carried stories through the hills, and the people were kind in a way that didn't ask for anything in return. I worked in Leith, just outside Edinburgh, in a clinic that served mostly elderly and immigrant populations. The days were long, the nights were cold, and the work was emotionally exhausting, but I felt alive. For the first time in years, I wasn't someone's daughter, someone's fiancé, someone's responsible older sister. I was just me. I sent postcards home. I tried calling James once a week. At first, he answered with excitement, asked about the clinic, told me about his job at the firm. But over time, his voice became distant. He said he was busy, said he couldn't talk long. Once, he forgot to call on my birthday, said he sent flowers. I never got them. I should have known something was wrong. It was a fellow volunteer, Miranda, who first mentioned the rumors. She was from Connecticut, had mutual friends in Boston. "Hey Claire," she said one morning over tea. "I don't mean to be weird, but is James still your fiancé?" The question stunned me. What kind of question is that? I just heard something. That he's been seen around with someone. A brunette. Flashy. People think it's serious. There was only one brunette in Boston who matched that description. And she wasn't just someone. She was my sister. I laughed at first. The idea was absurd. My own sister? With my fiancé? It sounded like the plot of a trashy drama. I brushed it off. But after that, the silence started ringing louder. The missed calls. The vague replies. The way no one at home responded to my messages. I lasted another month in Scotland. But my heart wasn't in it anymore. I booked a flight back to Boston in September, 3 months earlier than planned. I told no one. I wanted to see for myself what had happened in my absence. And I was not prepared for what I would find. The air felt different when I landed at Logan International Airport. I remember stepping out into the September chill, dragging my single suitcase behind me, heart pounding like I was returning from war. In a way, I was. But the battlefield wasn't overseas. It was my own home. I didn't call anyone. No warning. No, I'm back. I just called a cab and gave the driver my address in Cambridge. The ride was quiet. I stared out at the gray skyline, wondering if my city would feel the same. It didn't. The streets I used to love seemed colder, more distant. Like the whole place had moved on without me. When I arrived at my brownstone, something fell off before I even stepped inside. The porch light was changed, brighter, whiter, too modern. The welcome mat I bought with the words, "Come in, we're cozy," was gone. In its place was a plain black rubber mat with a company logo. I unlocked the door slowly, half expecting it to stick the way it always had in the fall. It didn't. Someone had fixed it. The inside smelled like expensive perfume and fresh paint. Not a trace of my vanilla-scented candles. My shoes were gone from the entryway. The bookshelf had been rearranged. My antique mirror from my grandmother was no longer in the hallway. Instead, a full-length gold-framed monstrosity, definitely Lila's taste, had replaced it. I walked upstairs, heart in my throat. My bedroom door was open. My bed had new sheets. Satin. Cream-colored. The kind you'd never actually sleep on because they're just for show. There were 2 glasses on the nightstand. One still had lipstick smudged on the rim. Then I opened my closet. At first, I couldn't even process what I was seeing. My clothes were shoved to the back, barely hanging. In front were dresses that weren't mine, high-end labels I recognized from Lila's Instagram. And there, hanging on the hook where I had left it, was my engagement dress. Only it wasn't mine anymore. It had been altered, hemmed, trimmed, reshaped. Like it had been butchered into something more her. I walked over and touched it, and for the first time in months, I felt hot, furious tears well up in my eyes. That dress was mine. That life was mine. I stormed out of the room and down the stairs, only to run straight into Lila. "Claire?" she gasped, like she'd seen a ghost. Her long brown curls were perfect, her makeup flawless, not a single thing out of place. She was wearing silk pajamas in my house. "Didn't expect to see me?" I said. My voice was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that comes just before everything explodes. "Oh my God," she laughed awkwardly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "You weren't supposed to be back until December?" "No," I replied, setting my suitcase by the wall. "But I figured I should come back before you decided to sell the house too." She gave me that smug little smile she always used when she was caught. "I didn't think you'd mind," James said. "Don't," I snapped, holding up a hand. "Do not say his name." She blinked. "Well, you're going to have to get used to it. He's my husband now." I laughed. I didn't mean to, but it just came out. One loud, sharp, utterly genuine laugh that echoed off the high ceilings. She stared at me like I'd lost my mind. "You married James," I said, wiping a tear of laughter from my eye. "You actually married my fiancé. While I was out there giving vaccines and delivering babies in freezing clinics, you were here playing bride in my house. In my dress." Lila shrugged, a little defensively. Look, it just happened, okay? You were gone and James and I started spending time together. We clicked. You were off in Scotland doing your little charity thing. My little charity thing? I said, raising my voice for the first time. I was doing something meaningful. Something real. While you were busy stealing the one good thing I thought I had. She didn't flinch. You always acted like you were better than everyone. Always so noble. You think love waits around forever? You left. James needed someone. I was here. I took a deep breath. And our parents? Did they try to stop it? Did they say anything? She smirked. They were supportive. Mom always said you and James were mismatched. Dad said you were too independent. They think I'm better for him. Of course they did. I turned and walked into the kitchen, which had been completely redecorated. Granite counters now. New lighting. One of those fancy $1,200 espresso machines. I opened a drawer. All the mugs were different. Not a single one from my collection remained. Where is my stuff? I asked, my voice low. Stored, she said casually. In the attic. Or sold. Some of it didn't really fit the new aesthetic. I almost laughed again. New aesthetic. That's what my life had become. A rebrand. A Lila-styled version of everything I built. I walked back to the living room, grabbed my suitcase, and looked at her one last time. This house may look like yours now, I said, but every wall in it remembers me. Then I left. I stayed that night in a small hotel near Harvard Square. Nothing fancy, just a place with clean sheets and silence. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, wondering how betrayal could feel both expected and unimaginable at the same time. The next morning, I went back. Not to talk. Not to argue. Just to get my things. The ones that hadn't been sold or redecorated, out of existence. I dug through the attic and found a box labeled Seized Junk. Inside were old photo albums, my college degree, a scarf James gave me, and the journal I kept during nursing school. I carried that box out like it was made of glass. That was the day I stopped thinking of James as the one that got away. Because he didn't get away. He was given away, served up on a silver platter, by my own family, and I let them think they'd won. But the story wasn't over. Not even close. A week after I moved out of my own house, the invitation came. A cream-colored envelope with gold trim slid beneath the door of the tiny apartment I had just rented in Somerville. No return address. No note. Just a single, engraved card inside. You are cordially invited to a family dinner. Sunday, 7 p.m. 418 Oak Ridge Lane, Albany, New York. I didn't have to ask whose house that was. My parents had moved into that suburban mausoleum after my father retired from the Massachusetts State Police. A quiet, gated cul-de-sac with manicured lawns, smiling neighbors, and enough granite countertops to sink a yacht. Part of me wanted to tear the card in half and toss it in the trash. Another part, the colder, meaner part, decided I'd go. Not for reconciliation. Not for forgiveness. I went because I wanted to look them in the eyes. The ones who had watched my world unravel and applauded the performance. The drive to Albany was long and quiet. I didn't play music, just the hum of the tires and the storm of thoughts in my head. I replayed everything. The moment I saw Lila in my dress, James's name on her lips, my parents' silence through it all. I wasn't sure what I hoped to find at that dinner. Closure? No. Just the truth. And maybe the satisfaction of watching them squirm. Their house stood tall on a corner lot, all white brick and oversized windows. Lights glowed from inside. The driveway was lined with two new cars, one of them a sleek silver Jaguar I knew James couldn't afford on his own. So either Daddy helped, or James married better than I thought. I knocked once. The door opened almost instantly. Claire, my mother said, blinking. You came. She looked exactly the same. Perfectly pressed slacks, white blouse, gold bracelet. That careful, rehearsed smile that always looked more polite than warm. I said I would, I replied, stepping in. Wasn't sure I was still family. She ignored that. Dinner's almost ready. Everyone's in the living room. Everyone. I walked in and found them there. My father, sitting in his old recliner, James standing by the fireplace, and Lila, of course, on the sofa in a red dress that looked like it had never been sat in before. Her heels were off, her legs curled under her like she was posing for a magazine. James had the audacity to smile. "Claire," he said, like I was a distant cousin who just returned from vacation. I looked him over once. He'd lost weight. His suit was tailored too tight, like he was trying to squeeze into a life he didn't belong in. "Nice to see you," I said flatly. Lila stood. "We weren't sure you'd come," she said, tucking a piece of hair behind her ear. "But I'm glad you did. We want to clear the air." I wanted to laugh again, but I didn't. Not this time. "Is that what this is?" I asked. "A peace offering?" "It's a family dinner," my father said, finally speaking. "Time to put this foolishness behind us." Foolishness. I nodded slowly. "You mean the part where my fiancé married my sister? Or the part where you let it happen?" No one answered. We sat down for dinner at their oversized mahogany table. Candles. Crystal wine glasses. A roast that smelled too good for such a cold room. I ate in silence for a while, letting them squirm in the awkward quiet they'd created. "So," I said, finally breaking the tension. "When did it start?" James looked at Lila. She looked down at her plate. My mother cleared her throat. "About a month after you left," James said. I stared at him. "You told me you loved me the day I boarded that plane." "I thought I did," he said. "That's convenient." "It just happened," Lila said, her voice delicate. "We didn't plan it." "No," I said. "You just planned the wedding." My father slammed his fork down. "That's enough." "No," I snapped, turning to him. "You don't get to decide when it's enough. You sat there and watched your daughter get betrayed, and you didn't even call." "We didn't want to choose sides," he said. "You didn't have to," I replied. "You just chose the one that benefited you most." They all stared at me. Uncomfortable. Guilty. And yet, still entitled. Lila reached out a hand. "Claire, please." I pulled back. "Don't. You don't get to play innocent. You wore my dress. You married my fiancé. And you smiled through it all." "I love him," she whispered. "Then I hope you love the version of him you stole. Because he's not the man I knew." James opened his mouth. I stopped him. "You know," I said, leaning back in my chair, "when I was in Edinburgh, delivering babies in rooms with no heat and barely any light, I used to think about you. I'd wonder what James was doing. If he missed me. If my family was proud of the work I was doing. And it turns out, you were just redecorating my life like it was some empty Airbnb." I stood up. "You invited me here to make yourselves feel better. Not to apologize. Not to make it right. But I'm glad I came. I needed to see it for myself." "See what?" my mother asked, her voice sharp. "That you're all just hollow," I said. "This house, these lies, this picture-perfect setup. You built it on betrayal. And I want no part of it." I turned and walked toward the door. James called after me. "Claire, wait." I paused. Just for a second. And then I laughed. A real laugh. From the belly. Not bitter, just done. "Good luck, James," I said. "She's your problem now." And I walked out, leaving their perfect little world to rot from the inside out. I didn't take their calls, didn't respond to the carefully worded emails from my mother, and certainly didn't attend the holiday party they pretended I was still welcome at. I moved on, quietly, deliberately. Rented a new apartment in Beacon Hill, smaller than my brownstone but mine. I painted the walls a soft sage green, filled the shelves with used books and plants that refused to die. It wasn't glamorous, but it was peaceful. I started over. Not the dramatic kind of reinvention you see in movies. No new haircuts or international escapes this time. Just the slow, steady act of building a life from what remained. I took a job at a women's health center in Boston, one that focused on survivors. Fitting, I suppose. Every now and then, someone from the old life would pop up, an email from James that I never opened, a like from Lila on one of my Instagram posts, probably accidental. I didn't respond. What could I say? They'd already said enough, and I had nothing left to give them. But what surprised me most was how light I felt. I thought betrayal would anchor me, drag me down into bitterness. But it didn't. I laughed that night because something in me broke open, and inside the break, there was freedom. I wasn't tied to James anymore, or my parents, or Lila. I wasn't even angry. I was free. Sometimes I pass by the bridal shop in Back Bay where I first saw the dress. The champagne silk, the beaded waistline, the quiet elegance of it. I don't stop. I just smile. Because I remember who I was when I chose that dress. Hopeful, in love, maybe a little naive. But I also remember who I was when I laughed at that dinner table. And that woman? She's the one I became proud of. In the end, they took a dress, a man, a moment. But I got the last laugh. And it's been echoing ever since.